Ever since I stopped reviewing that other show, I thought it was best to look for another that I could talk about every episode for, and let me tell you, it wasn't easy. But one day I stumbled upon The Owl House around the time before it officially premiered, and I zoned out. Yeah, I watched the first few episodes and I moved on. It wasn't until the show came back that caused me to properly get into it, and by the time season 1 was over, I was like, holy shit. I might have found it. So that's what it's been leading up to. Until it's over, I'm going to be reviewing every episode of The Owl House. However, I won't be doing it the way I used to. Truth be told, I don't typically like using the same concept someone else came up with because that makes me look unoriginal and lazy. Yes, I know Animation Explosion is basically my Disney-cember, but hey, they copied AVGN's Monster Madness thing already, so that doesn't count. Anyway, from now on, I'm going to be ranking every episode from worst to best, and still provide my thoughts on them. I found this a lot easier to do, and it gives me more time to talk about why a certain episode fits high or low on the list compared to others. And using clips from the show is just better to look at than a frickin' PowerPoint slide presentation. Just to remind everybody, this video is only focusing on season 1. I'm ranking every episode from that season. Season 2 will come after the whole thing is finished airing, so stay tuned for that. I'll eventually do the same thing for season 3, and maybe by the end I'll do a long video with every episode ever, but that can wait.
It's so easy not to try.
Are you really that surprised? I'll start this off nicely by saying that despite this episode being the worst, I'd still rather watch it than a good 80% of the bad episodes from The Loud House. But it still sucks. Once Upon a Swap is an absolute embarrassment. It's so bad. Out of every episode in the show, this one is commonly considered the worst by the fanbase, and once you start watching, it's easy to see why. For a show all about subverting the typical tropes that cartoons are plagued with, it's pretty contradicting to have an episode that fulfills that trope with nothing to make it stand out. I already don't like body swap episodes as is, so that's already raising some red flags. They're always played out the same for me. The characters swap bodies to learn life lessons about each other, and that's all she wrote. Literally everything about this episode I saw coming the very second they set up what the characters are complaining about. Luz is in Ida's body, Ida's in King's body, and King is in Luz's body, and they all have the same story archetype. They test the water, it starts out great, and then it turns to shit until they cross paths and swap back. I was bored out of my mind watching this one. There's nothing that makes it stand out. Now, I'd be fine with all the unoriginal stereotypes if this episode was at least funny, but outside of maybe 1 or 2 moments, every single attempt at humor falls flat on its face. The obvious laughs for me came from Hootie. Honestly, this character is never not funny. I don't know how Alex Hirsch does it, but he's a freaking genius. This episode tries so hard to mock the body swap ideas, even referencing Freaky Friday at one point, which doesn't work because it plays itself straight from start to mostly the end. If you're going to play it up as a satire, go all out with it and keep to its demographic. Instead, this episode tries to do both, and any attempt at a moral is thrown out the window since they learn to help each other out, but then Ida and King won't help Luz clean the house. Way to contradict yourself. The characters don't help much either. Luz is an idiot in that she has no problem with bringing more attention to Ida's shop despite knowing that she's on the run from the Emperor and that Ida is trying to keep a low profile. Basha is also at her worst in this episode, and it's not that I dislike Basha in general, I actually find her to be a pretty funny bully character, but here she mostly just complains and makes cringy Penstagram jokes. Those 2 old ladies that run the shop also suck because they try so hard to be creepy that it makes them look so pathetic and lame. And if that's the joke, then it isn't funny either. And don't even get me started on Lilith.
Oh, thank goodness, a familiar face! You're Ida's sister, right?
Your show of affection is touching.
I guess the only other admirable thing is how the characters actually look in each other's bodies. I mean, Luz's face on Ida's body is actually pretty adorable. But no, some minor positives aren't enough to save such a pathetic piece of storytelling. This episode is so bad that I often try to pretend it isn't even canon, because I know the story writers can do better than this. I don't know if it was Disney who wanted this, or if the crew were stretched for ideas, but the episode is still shit. End of story. You know, it eats me up to put this episode so low on the list. I genuinely like the Bat Queen, and I was hoping we'd get a good starring episode for her. The backstory they hint for her got me intrigued and raises so many questions, like, did the Bat Queen used to be a palisman for the Titan? It's all interesting questions that got me wanting to see more, which I would care about if this episode was actually good. I'm sorry, I know there's at least a handful of people who like it, but I just don't get it. To start with, the A-plot is actually pretty boring. It sets up an interesting backstory for the Bat Queen, like I've said before, but the build-up to it is so lame. I think learning more about the palisman would have been more interesting, as we could learn where they came from or how they made. Instead, it's just Luz doing what's essentially chores for the Bat Queen, and then we get that cliched moment where she says that Luz has to earn Albert's trust back and then acts like he has to make his own decisions. Just shut up. But you know what? The A-plot may be boring, but it's a masterpiece compared to the B-plot. This is one of those episodes that give people who hate King an excuse to hate him even more. He is so pathetic in this episode, and it's hard to feel sorry for him when he regrets his mistakes. He willingly takes Eda out in public while she's in her owl form, or because he felt a little picked on by some babies. It's even more baffling when King has actively seen how dangerous Owl Eda can be in The Intruder, but he doesn't care because he has to get his revenge on some kid. And yes, he does feel bad for it later on, but at what cost? If you want to make King do something wrong but still empathize with him, do what really Small Problems did, where King was unaware of the severe consequences the spray bottle would actually do if mishandled. But nope, he knows Owl Eda's a threat, and that she can be uncontrollable at any point, yet he still does this shit. If you can tell, the B-plot is the primary reason this episode is so low on my countdown. The A-plot sucks too, but at least it kept my attention somewhat. It culminates into a boring time waster with a particularly harsh using of King. I promise he'll be better next time.
Farewell, go to hell, au revoir.
Oh god damn it, another mediocre solo episode for a character I like? Can you not butcher their first chances, Disney? In all seriousness, Something Ventured, Someone Framed isn't necessarily a bad episode, but it's still pretty mediocre. It's a shame too, because this is Gus's only starring episode in season 1, and it would have been cool to give the kid some much needed spotlight. If I were to come up with an episode about Gus, I'd make one that dives more into his appreciation towards humans. He seems to be one of the most supportive students for human culture, so why not dive into why he likes humans, why he's intrigued by their habits, and why he enjoys doing what he's doing. But nah, instead this episode is just a lame lie-revealed narrative that hardly does anything with Gus's appreciation. Hooray. In fact, when watching this episode a few times, I had to ask myself, did he really need to lie? Principal Bump does seem pretty convincing. I'm sure it wouldn't have been difficult to ask him to let Luz in for just one day. You'd still have the conflict with Gus trying to stay president, and you'd still have him teaching Bartholomew a lesson. I'd much rather have that than this formulaic plot trope, which of course leads to Luz getting upset with Gus for lying to her, and it's just so boring. And speaking of Bartholomew, I don't like him either. This has nothing to do with what happens in season 2, it's a season 1 ranking, so we're judging it as it is right now, but he's nothing more than a condescending jerk who teases Gus all the time and literally wants nothing more than power and drama. And don't bother commenting, Yoshi player, you're a hypocrite because you like Boscha and she's a jerk too. Here's the thing, Boscha is a character who just plays bully for her own fun. She's not looking to prove anything, and she's not letting anyone get to her so easily. She's not a bully just because she's looking for drama or conflict, she's doing it because she just enjoys doing it. Bartholomew, meanwhile, is just a standard cliched bully with nothing going for him, and that's my core problem. But for as much as I don't like the A-plot though, the B-plot does make it a little bit better. It's great seeing Eda trying to clean up her own dirty acts just so Luz can go to Hexside. Really shows how far Eda has gone in being a maternal figure for her, and it does give off some of the funniest scenes in the episode. Also, I just like seeing Skara. I don't know why, I just do.
Wow! Friendship is the real magic.
All in all, it's not a bad episode. The B-plot does save it a little bit. It's just bogged down by a weak story and weak antagonist. I feel like I'll be getting some flack for putting this episode really low on the list, since the general consensus perceives this as a really great episode. And like, that's cool and all, more power to you guys, but I just fail to see what's so amazing about it. Yeah, I liked it at first, but every time I watch it again, it only sours on me more and more. I'll preempt it with the few positives I have. The dynamic between Luz and Willow I find to be really sweet. I love how determined Luz is to disguise herself as an abomination, not only to help Willow out, but also get a good look at Hex side. I love how even though these two have hardly met, there's a sense of care and love between the two, and it just melts my heart every time. Remember in my Lumity video when I said I wouldn't have minded if Willow was Luz's love interest instead? I still feel that way, to be honest. And as far as first introductions go, I really like Gus. He's a sweet and charming character, and his immediate liking to Luz's nature is really cute. But aside from those aspects, this episode is just really bland, and in some cases a bit frustrating. The story itself is so basic and formulaic, as all it amounts to is Luz helping Willow get back at Amity for bullying her, followed by all the obvious issues that come with it, as well as there being a lame B story that I felt like I was falling asleep to. But no, my main issue with this episode is the character introduction. I like Gus, as I said before, but when it comes to Willow and especially Amity, it falters for me. And I can already hear the comments saying, well, Yoshi player, it's only their first episode, of course they're gonna seem a bit rough around the edges. Okay, first off, that's no excuse. If a character doesn't leave a good impact the first time, you shouldn't tell me off for not liking them from the start. But predominantly, my issue with these two is more so how lacking they are in comparison to what they're going to be later on. As in, they don't feel very three-dimensional. Willow is a bit off in this regard, since the episode doesn't give a proper reason as to why she's in the situation she's in. It does an alright job setting up how powerful she is, but still. And as for Amity, I'm gonna say it, I f***ing hate her here.
Did he just say, aye? He did.
Which is crazy, because in this day and age, she's one of my favorite characters. But much like Willow, she's written as a one-dimensional stereotype with no layers to her. It's like this episode wasn't written with Amity's redemption arc in mind. And if the show was hell-bent on doing that, it should have shown that there was more to Amity than meets the eye. Especially since episodes like Wing It Like Witches show that there was always a softer side to her even before she met Luz. But none of that is showcased here, since she's just written as a bully with no depth, especially when it comes to the climax, where she'll willingly let Principal Bump cut open Luz, essentially kill her without a single look of remorse on her face. I know Amity's supposed to be mean, but I never imagined her to be a killer. And yeah, you could argue that witches regularly do this, and Amity maybe didn't know what Luz was, but still, I have a feeling she knew it wasn't a piece of goop and she was still willing to kill her. If a character doesn't leave a good impact on you the first time, then you'll have hardly any interest in seeing them develop. When Amity got better in Convention, I was more so shocked that they went in this direction and not like, oh come on, I want to see her get better. Anyway, yeah, this episode's just kinda meh. I like Gus and I like some of the set pieces, but everything falls flat. Thank God Amity got better as time went on, or else I wouldn't have given a shit if she had a crush on Luz. So here we are, the very first episode of the show. Numero uno, the one that started it all. And I don't like it. Remember when I said it took a while to really like this show? Yeah, part of the reason is because of the pilot. A Lying Witch in a Warden is far from the worst pilot I've seen, but in comparison to almost everything else that came in season 1, and especially 2, this admittedly wasn't the best start. Pilot episodes are crucial in getting things right. You want to establish a world, introduce us to your main characters properly, and foreshadow elements that could come into fruition later on. And while this episode does it okay for the most part, there's a few elements that are extremely rough. My main problem with this episode is Luz. This has nothing to do with what I think of her in general, but here it feels like they're trying way too hard to force the audience to sympathize with her, by saying that she's just being weird and everybody thinks it's a bad thing. And she's technically true, it is okay to be weird, but not to the extent that Luz is in this episode. She's literally causing other people to freak out because of what she's doing, and I would too if I'm being honest. Hell, she was going to set off fireworks in the school. The whole show is meant to focus on Luz getting out of her fantasy stuff and learn to grow up, and none of that is presented here. I also think the dialogue is really clunky. A lot of it resorts to telling the audience basic stuff instead of showing them, and then of course there's expository dialogue which is really annoying. Of course there's the obvious saying, us weirdos have to stick together, again and again. In spite of those issues, this episode isn't bad by any means. The other characters are spot on, the humor is actually pretty great, and the Warden Wrath is a pretty good villain. But it's primarily Luz, the dialogue, and forced moral that bring it below average. It sucks the pilot episode isn't as good as I remember, but at least this show evolved into something greater afterwards. This is one of those episodes that feel like a missed opportunity. Given the title, it could have been an interesting delve into some of the backstory behind Hooty. I would have loved to know how he was created, or how he might have been conjured, or how he managed to get frickin' chicken legs underneath the house. I know, I need to judge the episode for what it is rather than what I want, but I'm only saying this because the episode is just kinda meh. It's not bad, it just leaves such little impact that I'm struggling to think of what to say about it. It boils down to Luce, Willow, and Gus managing to control the house, and then Willow convincing Luce that they should take the house to Amity so she can see that she's a powerful witch. The only interesting part we get out of this is learning that Willow and Amity used to be friends, which a certain episode would dive into more, but as a setup, it's alright. I thought the joke with Ida winning several card games and then suddenly losing one at the worst time was pretty funny, but the B-plot also introduces this one-off character known as Tibbles, and I don't like him. He's just a weaker version of Gideon from Gravity Falls without the humor that made that character enjoyable. The rest of the episode is standard and serviceable, but that's about it. I have little to no energy with this one. And here we have another episode that haters of King like to use to prove why they hate him. And yeah, I'm not gonna act like I should defend him here. I know I defended him a little bit before in this episode, but he's still kinda bad. And how unfortunate is it that this episode came out right after Escape of the Palisman, King's worst episode in my eyes. In all fairness, he's not as bad here as he is there, but he's still not all that sympathetic. Poor Luz works tirelessly on her own stories, and King takes those stories for his own without crediting her once. Considering the relationship they've built up for the last few episodes, this feels like a retcon in a way. I know the show is supposed to showcase King's insecurities, but they could have done it in a way that at least made me empathize with him more, and I don't think it works well in this regard. But still, at least unlike the other episode, he's not putting someone else's safety on the line for a stupid revenge motive, he's just letting fame get to his head. There is a reason this episode is higher than the other few, and you guessed it. It's the B-plot with Ida and Lilith. The first time that these two decide to work together in the show, and it's pretty cool to see. In some scenario, it almost feels like Ida purposefully fell for this scam just to keep an eye on Lilith. I doubt that's the case, but even still, it's pretty cute. I think the antagonist is okay. I love how Tiny Nose is the one who ends up saving Luz and King through her writing skills, considering she's the self-insert of the show creator Dana Terrace, but other than that, this episode's just okay. A good B-plot and good moments are enough to keep it from being bad, even if King's behavior still needs some working out.
We're tiny, we're toony, we're all a little loony.
I literally jinxed myself. Another episode that King haters use to prove why they hate him. Oh well, it doesn't matter this time, because of these 3 episodes, I think this one is the least bad. Well, that's kind of an overstatement. I don't actually dislike King in this episode. I won't deny what he did was wrong, but unlike the other 2 episodes, his reason for doing so is a bit more understandable. He lives in a period where he doesn't have that many friends apart from Luce and maybe Ida, and seeing her go off to do things with Willow and Gus while almost essentially acting like he isn't there got me to at least sympathize with him better than the other 2. And it does make sense, since King has no idea how long Luce will stay in the Boiling Isles before she inevitably goes home. Their relationship here is really cute, probably one of their sweeter episodes, I think. Also, him choosing the friendship necklace over the demonic power skull is just such great character development. So yeah, we're in a bit of a role reversal. King is one of the best parts in an episode that is just perfectly okay. It uses a concept I'm not too crazy about, and I find it kind of ironic that this idea is used in the same episode that Tibbles returns in. And much like his last appearance, Tibbles is still the same pathetic twat that I don't care for. And this episode particularly wants to build him up as a serious threat when it's almost impossible to take a character like him seriously. Oh, and by the way, why can't we refer to him by his last name Grimhammer more often? That is an infinitely cooler name. The only other issue I have with this episode is that Gus is a bit of a dick. He's constantly making fun of King for his smaller size and then complains about being too short in a number of instances. Plus, he was technically the reason King accidentally dropped his spray, and this could have easily been avoided had King not tried to do it on purpose. It didn't make Gus horrible, just a bit unlikable compared to his other appearances. Ah well, at least Hooty had some funny moments, as usual.
I'm gonna kick your ass from here to right over there.
And here we are with the first good episode on the list. It's kind of ironic how much I say I love this show when we're only now reaching the episodes I like. But even then, I don't think Youngblood Old Souls is a great episode, it's just decent. But compared to that of the previous episode, which completely blew me away, this was a fairly disappointing follow-up, I won't lie. My main issue with it is that it feels really rushed, and the plot choices they made here come off as lame. I hate how they went with the obvious direction of Bellows saying he'll cure Ada, but of course it turns out to be a lie, cause get it? He's the bad guy, so of course he lies. But like, I think there was a better way of having Bellows incapable of curing Ada, like maybe only Lilith can do it because she's the one who cursed her in the first place, or whoever it was that gave her the stuff to do so, but maybe neither of them have no idea how to cure her. That might have been a bit stronger, I think. I don't think Lilith's redemption arc was completely awful, but it did seem a little sudden after everything she's gone through. Oh, and now that I'm talking about Lilith again, I'm just gonna say it, I don't like her in Season 1. Season 2 massively improved her, to be fair, but throughout this season, she's mainly just the side villain who tries to capture Ada and fails miserably all the time. It works for the stories, I suppose, but character-wise, there wasn't a lot to her. With that said though, there is still plenty of reasons this episode is high on the list. The action scenes with Luz are a lot of fun. Bellows, despite the whole lying bullcrap, still serves a creepy presence in this episode that he hasn't really done so since, in all honesty. This episode doesn't have as many jokes as the traditional episode would, but some of the ones it did have were pretty funny. Overall, it's just a decent episode, but also a pretty weak season finale. It's a shame this was what I got after Agony of a Witch, but I suppose if Season 2 made up for all of this, I can't act like I'm too disappointed. Plus, that last scene with Ada and Lilith admittedly was pretty amazing.
A, B, C, D, E, F, gun.
This episode single-handedly stayed below the others purely for its B-plot. Look, I'm all for Ada being a mother figure, it's wholesome to see, but the whole thing of characters looking after babies or infants is a trope I despise, especially seeing as nearly every cartoon likes to use it in one way or another, and it almost never works. Thankfully, it isn't in the episode for most of it, and the rest of what we got is good enough. This is our introduction to Emira and Edric, and while their first impressions weren't amazing, they didn't leave as much of a nasty first impression as Amity did. They do some questionably bad things here, but it seems they at least mean well and just want Amity to light up more. It's cute seeing Luz try so hard for Amity to be her friend, and their interactions were at least more toned down than in Convention. This was the episode where after it ended, I started to think that perhaps Amity might grow on me in later episodes, and boy did that sure pay off. I don't have too much to say for this one, it's just a nice and fun episode, but could have done without all that babysitting nonsense. Oh look, it's the Gay Panic episode, the one where Amity turns into a fumbling doofus who can barely speak whenever Luz is around her. And I don't care. Yeah, I'm probably gonna get a bit of flack for saying this, but I initially thought the whole gay panic stuff in this episode was kind of irritating. I get that Disney were like, hey guys, remember when it was revealed that Amity has a crush on Luz? That wasn't a one-time thing, we're really doing it. But did they really have to have Amity fumbling like an idiot like 5 or 6 times? Twice is enough, but that many? It feels a bit ham-fisted. In retrospect, it's not as annoying nowadays considering they never stuck to it this way, which I was worried about. But even still, I think they went just a little bit overboard here. I get why she'd be acting this way around Luz, but if later episodes showed her feeling more calm around her before the inevitable, why did they do that here? At least I love this part.
Me? On a team with you? Running around in cute uniforms? Sweating? I gotta go!
So with that said, why do I still find this episode good? Put simply, it's just a fun episode. I love the sports montages of Luz trying to help Willow and Gus get better at Grudgeby. The actual montages themselves are pretty funny. I love the backstory Amity got where she used to be captain, even if it showed she still has somewhat of a soft side, which only made her role in I Was a Teenage Abomination even more frustrating. The B-plot with Ada was pretty funny, and I'm just gonna say it, I love Boscha. I'm not as much of a fan of her as most people are, but damn it, she just cracks me up for some reason. I always love those bully characters that fully embrace what they're doing and are clearly having fun with it. Yeah, she's a total bitch, but I can't help it. Some of her lines here just got a chuckle out of me. And it's obvious to say that the sports match itself was really fun. Plus it was cute to see Boscha's friend showing softer sides for Willow and Luz, which almost makes me think that Skara has a lot more going on than I'm led to believe. While this episode isn't anything special, It's just, simply put, a really fun time.
We're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz.
This is the first episode that really dives into the horror aesthetic. I love the antagonist here, who successfully conjures up all of this fake stuff as a means to trick Luz, and it adds so much to the atmosphere. But I think what I love the most about this episode is that it's also a first that really subverts the first impression most can have when going into a new show. I'm sure most people thought that this would be some kind of Chosen One story about Luz trying to stand out just because she's a human, but this episode laughs at that idea and uses it to its advantage to tell a semi-interesting story. I say semi because part of me knew this wizard's words were a lie and that Luz was really being lured into a trap, but the whole idea is mocking familiar story tropes, and I commend that. The final shot at the end is just perfect, topped off with a really nice ending. There were a few parts that felt a little mean-spirited for me, but it wasn't enough to ruin what is otherwise a better first episode than what the first episode tried so desperately to get across. Did that make sense? Okay, so before I start, can I just ask, why the hell is Luz in her Hexside uniform at the very start of this? How on earth did the animators miss that? It's one thing for a color to get mixed up, but to have a whole uniform on her before she even gets it? What is Disney's secret? Anywho, the first day is great. I often hear people complaining that this episode breaking the rules of joining a track, as it specifically says you can only join one to focus on, but I think what the episode is saying is that you're allowed to join multiple tracks, but not multiple covens. This is even rectified in Season 2, where Principal Bump has an Abomination seal despite saying he was in the Bard track. Though that more or less breaks some continuity rules, I still think it's excusable. I also love the detention students, even if I'm not as crazy about Viney as everyone else seems to be. It's fun seeing them wanting to be in more than one track as they feel like their priorities go into several directions. Although, did we really need this whole misunderstanding moment where they think Luz was talking badly about them because Willow and Gus blurted them out without realizing it? That's probably my only real complaint with this one, and at least it is saved by a fun climax. King also had an amusing subplot to serve as a break from all the world building stuff the A-plot got across. This is just an all-around fun episode that, despite taking 12 other ones to get to, felt like an exceptional introduction to Hexside and the many covens the show would later dive into.
Oh, I'm so excited!
And now I feed.
So flowery, so awful.
Most formidable. Hecate could only screech. Screecheth, did she? For the screeching did worsen it.
Stop it! I will literally do anything to stop this!
Convention fucking rules, man. This is the first episode to introduce the Coven system, which already sets up some heavy world building and the goals that most students have to face, where you can only pick one Coven and you're stuck with that Coven for as long as you live. It's an interesting system that does get touched on in later episodes, but it already lays the foundation perfectly. Ida even tells Luz that's the reason she stayed solo and didn't want to join one to begin with, because joining a Coven can often strip witches of their full potential. Some witches are better suited to other covens, but the point is, some people just don't want to get stripped of how much potential they've got, which is why Luz is initially keen with all the covens at first, and that mindset drastically changes later down the line. She wants to be her own person and her own witch. Out of the first 5 episodes that Season 1 had, this one really dives into Luz's realization that the real world works differently than what she reads in her books. This is also where we're introduced to the Emperor's Coven, the highest coven ruled by the Emperor, and yeah, basically the one no one should trust, as well as Ida's sister Lilith. I already spoke about her before during the season finale, but I think part of the reason I wasn't into Lilith as much as I wanted to was because this episode actually lays a great foundation of her trying to mentor a student to join the Emperor's Coven, but also subtly showing us that she wants Ida to join as well. But after this point, she just transforms into a one-dimensional flat character who wants nothing more but Ida to join the Coven and repeatedly failing. And it sucks because they very well could have dived more into her character. And need I mention Amity? After her terrible first impression beforehand, this is where I really wish it was her first appearance. She's written far more as a competent witch who just wants to succeed with her goals and frequently pushing Luz away so she won't get distracted. Not some stuck-up bully character who just wants to be the best and will literally have Luz killed if things doesn't go her way. But it's still better here because the writers wrote it with Amity's character arc in mind. Even though she later becomes Luz's friend and also girlfriend, there are odds throughout out and is a brilliant test of their relationship. They're kind of the opposite of Ida and Lilith in this case, actually willing to resolve their differences somewhat and form a neutral respect. I love this episode for the groundwork it lays down and the new character arcs we're introduced to, even if some of them went down the drain in later episodes.
You got a friend in me.
Can I just say right off the bat that understanding Willow actually feels a lot scarier now that I think about it? Like, this episode is all about two girls going into someone's mind where there's potentially personal memories that they wouldn't want someone to see. Especially when one of those girls is the one that cut you down many years ago. Anywho, understanding Willow is amazing. It's a bit unfortunate that her name is in the title despite not actually playing the biggest role here. Like, yeah, we see most of her memories, but it's primarily focused on Amity and her development. But I'd say this episode is more so a showcase of who Willow actually is. Someone who means well and loves plant magic, but can also be driven by anger and insecurities. Also, she has two dads. That's nice. All this perfectly culminates when we're introduced to her inner Willow, who seems far more enraged and cut down by Amity's actions than Willow herself might be. The small attention to detail being that she's lit up by pink fire, the same fire that Amity used to put the photos out before, which could explain why she seems so angry in the first place. Amity burnt up one of Willow's memories, so she only felt compelled to do the same for all of their memories together. The gut-wrenching moment where Amity was forced to push Willow out of her life due to the Blight family having higher superiority was extremely heartbreaking. They managed to tackle the story of abuse in a mature and authentic way, and it earns my respect for it. Although I did find it a little confusing that they were able to see Amity's drama unfold with her parents, because that should really be a memory of Amity's, not Willow, so how the hell were they able to see this? But it does make it all the more heartwarming when Amity swears to Willow that she won't let Boscha or her friends pick on her anymore, and the brief glimpse of a younger Willow was just the cutest thing ever. The B-plot was also a delight to see. Practically anything with Hootie is a win. Man, understanding Willow was such a great episode. I rewatch it constantly and stands out as one of the best episodes of the entire show. Also this.
Why do you look like you've seen a ghost? Is there a ghost in photo class? Are they cute?
Boscha says non-binary rights. Adventures in the Elements is an episode I love primarily because of the character interactions. Don't get me wrong, we've had stuff like that in other episodes too, but something about how it's handled here I absolutely adore. This is the closest the show got since the first few episodes where Luz and Ida had a lot of bonding time. Ida trying to get Luz to see the symbols on how to conjure her own magic because simply teaching her how to do it naturally won't work. This isn't a situation where Ida isn't teaching Luz spells because she's lazy, but rather that she can't. She's far more capable with spells than Luz will ever be, so getting her to see the smaller things in magic isn't going to be as easy for her. It would explain why she sent Luz to Hexside in episode 9, because perhaps someone there can teach her this stuff instead, and eventually Luz uses that mindset to conjure her second glyph, showing that magic is indeed everywhere. It's moments like this I was missing for the show, and thank God they had one last hurrah for Luz being a solo witch before moving into Hexside and learning more magic. It's also sweet to see Amity and her siblings getting along more, being much more of the teasing but encouraging siblings rather than exposing her secrets and trying to soften her up more. Elsewhere, King gets his own subplot with Hootie that thankfully doesn't take up too much time, but it's just so damn funny. I love hearing what's basically Alex Hirsch talking to himself over a situation as childish as toys coming to life and overthrowing you. Plus, the dynamic between Luz and Amity in this episode was adorable. I really love this moment where Luz screws up big time, and instead of saying something like, "You'll only make things worse," Amity says this.
Stay put! You'll only get hurt.
It may not mean much, but this simple line makes a big difference. You can really see how much Amity has grown to caring about Luz. It's just such a joy to watch. Can you see why I've become such a big fan of this show? When they turn out amazing episodes, they really do. And now we're entering the top 3, so what could they be, and where? I'm disappointed that The Intruder doesn't get as much love as I'm giving credit for. Each to their own, I guess, but this episode always stood out to me, even during the early days of the Owl House and just as much nowadays. Yet everyone seems to brush it aside in favour of the Groms and the Agonies and the knocking on Hootie's door. Me personally, I loved this episode, and they couldn't have picked a better one to introduce Ida's curse, seeing as The Intruder is actually the first episode that sort of fits a serialized format. Beforehand, episodes played out in a rather episodic format, and I think most of us thought that might have been the direction the show was going in. The Intruder lets us know that the show has some serious storylines going on that it would later dive into, and deliver exciting stories that now kept us fans coming back for more. Even though after this one came out, fans would just collectively groan whenever a filler episode came along, that might explain why there hasn't been any in season 2 so far. And while I'm not going to defend this episode for sparking a negative outlook on filler episodes, I could care less because of how good it was. The atmosphere is stellar, all taking place at the Owl House but in extremely dark lighting with rain bursting outside and a mysterious beast roaming through. The shining force for me, however, is Luce, and how much I relate to her desire to learn magic. She isn't capable of learning magic naturally, and forms her own method because her body can't produce the kind of magic that Ida does. But it also causes her to lose focus of King teaching her all about demons and how to protect herself, both of which play crucial elements in the climax. Considering Dana Terrace confirmed that Luce has ADHD, it's easy for people on the spectrum to connect with that. How learning all of these new things can feel crucial to one, otherwise they'll feel like they just wasted their time doing nothing. I relate to Luce so much in this episode while also having a blast with everything that's going on. I'll admit that Ida keeping her secret from Luce and King was a little bit questionable given what happens in later episodes. I kinda figured she'd be more paranoid to warn others of her condition, but she learns not to do that now, so I guess that's fine. Either way, I hold The Intruder on a very high pedestal with a relatable conflict for Luce, the amazing atmosphere, and gorgeous animation. Even though I'm perfectly accepting of filler episodes as long as they're done right, this kind of stuff is something I love to see. Also, is nobody going to address the fact that Hootie actually dies in this episode? Like, yeah, he comes back later, but damn, man. Titular character dead. Honestly, they could have just called this episode Agony and it would still be so fitting. It isn't just agonizing for the characters, it was agonizing for the fans. Do you have any idea how painful it is to wait just an entire week to see what happens next? I bet it was even worse when Infinity War fans were waiting for Endgame. That was an entire year. Despite the wordplay there, this episode is anything but wretched. It's in my top 5 best episodes of the entire show. The most brilliant thing about this episode is that it sets out what it wants to do and succeeds. When you've grown to care and love these characters so much for the last few months, having that sense of comfort ripped from your body thanks to this one episode means that it works for those that actually care about it. I actually nearly cried during the end, which goes to show how gut-wrenching it feels. And yeah, it does suck that the episode that came after this one was kind of 50-50, but even still, the work here must be commended. And man, the introduction to Bellows sure is something. He's not my favourite villain of the Disney cartoons, but I absolutely adore his presence here. He hardly does or says anything, but once his motives are made clear, you seem almost terrified of what he could do if Lilith doesn't succeed in her goal. I remember when I first saw that picture of Bellows bringing about peaceful magic and everyone looks happy, but then when he tells Lilith about her punishment, you suddenly hear screams while staring at said picture. Like I said, it's always the little things that stick out to show how strong the writing is. The emotional core hits a home run here. I've gotten to know and love these characters for so long, and seeing the impact they have on each other is what makes it all the more heartbreaking when Ida gets taken away from Luce. They've helped each other grow and show compassion for each other more than they've ever believed. And need I bring up the last 5 minutes? What can I even say? Everything about it is perfect. The fight between Ida and Lilith has some of the smoothest animation I've seen yet and racks up the tension more and more as it goes along. And it's funny enough that I was already not liking Lilith beforehand and then literally wanted to slap her when this whole thing was done. I don't even know what else to say, man. This episode is such an amazing watch. I don't get as emotional for it nowadays as I did when it first came out, but it truly has something to behold that fans of the show adore for a reason. And yet, it's not even number 1. It is, of course. Yeah, you probably never heard of this episode because it was never officially released, but I managed to see it when it was leaked, and holy sh**, it is a phenomenal episode. Yeah, you know that mysterious production number that was never part of season 1? It was going to this episode, and it was supposed to be the 17th one instead of Wing It Like Witches, but goddamn, I wish it was. Not only does it give us both a Lumity kiss and Lumity becoming canon much earlier than we expected, but it manages to redeem Boscha in the best way I've ever seen. Like seriously, they managed to redeem her in one episode, and it was handled so well, whereas Amity only got a few episodes to redeem herself. This is single-handedly the best episode of any cartoon I have ever seen, but I can't include it because it was never officially released. I only saw the leak. The only footage I could get was screenshots. So, take this one instead, I guess.
I guess you're good, I did.
Yes, I know everybody's gonna bring up all the comments I made towards this episode in my LGBT video, especially the progression of Amity developing a crush on Luz, which felt too sudden for me way back when. But in all honesty, I don't give a flying fuck about that, because Enchanting Gromfrite is a near-perfect experience that I will never get tired of, thanks in part to it dedicating itself to the characters that I've grown attached to. Yeah, I'm always gonna be a sucker for world building and new magic being learned, but Gromfrite encapsulates everything the characters have done up to this point and accentuates it to a T. And the main theme behind all of this is fear, which the main monster literally does, transform into people's worst fears in order to destroy them. Grom is one of the coolest monsters in the show purely for concept alone, and each of the characters' fears fits incredibly well. I sort of knew going into the show that Luz would eventually have to tell her mother about everything that's happened so far, and realize she's going to have to admit she didn't go to camp at all, which trust me, after the mid-season 2 finale is something you will not be prepared for. But it's also a pure example of Luz putting herself before others to show everyone that she's capable of conquering her fear. Yet when she faces Grom, she's actively trembling at the thought of her mother finding out about the Boiling Isles, something she herself was afraid to admit to others. And even though she never stops Grom by herself, she still takes a few steps forward afterwards, willing to tell her mum the very minimal of the friends she's made. Baby steps are keen for a character like Luz, and the show never jumps too rapidly on that train. King also goes through his fears of talking in front of a large audience, something we even see in season 2 to an extent, and his interactions with Gus are a lot better than in Really Small Problems. Almost like the writers knew that they made Gus a douche in that and vowed to make him better here. Even Ida has her own fear to an extent of seeing Luz get eaten by Grom. Sure, she laughs at the idea of Luz taking Amity's place as Grom Queen, but when Luz shows how serious she's getting, you begin to see her expression change into one of worry. Again, it's all about the little things that make moments like these so powerful. And then of course, there's all the stuff with Luz and Amity. Now, I'll try not to repeat what I already said in my LGBT video, but although I'm still a little skeptical on the whole idea of Amity having a crush on Luz after a few weeks, in hindsight, it's actually not as far-fetched as I made it out to be. After all, Luz is the first person in a long time that's made Amity so happy, so it sort of makes sense why she'd have a crush so quickly. Luz means so much to her that being rejected is literally her worst fear. Yeah, not disappointing her parents, not humiliating herself in front of a crowd, it's being rejected by the girl she's grown to love. If that isn't the saddest yet cutest thing I've ever seen, I don't know what is. And all that culminates into a stellar dance sequence. The show loves to use smooth animation for a pivotal moment, and this is no exception. It goes this far to show how much Luz and Amity have grown in the last few weeks and how much they've grown to like each other. And that only made their eventual asking out all the more satisfying, especially since it happened halfway through season 2 and not at the end of the damn show. With all these reasons, and possibly a few more that I'm missing out on, Enchanting Gromfrite is the best episode of season 1, one of the best cartoon episodes of 2020, and one of the best pieces of media in the LGBT community that I've ever seen. I can't get enough of it, and I swear to myself to watch it every June. It's just that fantastic. Looking back at season 1 in hindsight, I realize I may have given it just a bit too much credit last year. Maybe I was just so intrigued by all the new characters and world building that I sort of glossed over all the bad stuff. But even then, season 1 is still a damn good season that would eventually become a fantastic show. Sure, the episodes that do suck do really suck, and yes, there's some glaring problems that I may even forgot to mention in this video, but all in all, season 1 is still something I can go back to and watch with ease. At the very least, most of the bad episodes tier were filler episodes, so they can be easily skipped, and as long as that means I can get to the fantastic episodes, then it makes it all the more worthwhile. If you're someone watching this video who hasn't seen The Owl House yet, you owe it to yourself to check it out. For God's sake, most of the show is on Disney Plus right now. Don't pretend you don't have Disney Plus, I know you do. At this point, I doubt it'll ever top something like Gravity Falls or DuckTales 2017, but I have a feeling that The Owl House could potentially trump them both if it goes down this phenomenal route. Just to be clear, it's going to be a nightmare when I get to the Season 2 video purely for how impossible it's felt to rank some of these episodes from worst to best. But I cannot wait to see what we get out of it, and I wish all the luck and best to Dana Terrace and the crew to keep on at it with this fantastic show. It's something I'll forever hold on to and admire, even when it's over. Whew, that's my big project of the year done and dusted, and my next review is my next big project. Well, I delayed the inevitable long enough, but next time on Let's Tackle, it's time to give the character that my name is based on some real love and attention. Thank you guys for watching, stay safe out there, get vaccinated if you can, and until next time, keep on playing.